Welcome back to the Willow Center podcast, everybody. This is Season 4, Episode 3. I am one of your hosts, Chase Cotton, the Community Director here, along with...
I'm Mason, the Operations Director here at the Willow Center.
Thanks for tuning in again this month. So this month's topic that we've been chatting about within the Willow Center community online and internally as a team has been brain science. In particular, brain science and the emotions and how they're connected, right? Mm-hmm. And I found this quote that it's sort of silly, but it's like a poetic quote just about the brain as a structure that I felt somewhat inspired by. This comes from poet, essayist, and naturalist Diane Ackerman, and she said, "Shaped a little like a loaf of French country bread, our brain is a crowded chemistry lab, bustling with nonstop neural conversations. Imagine the brain, that shiny mound of being, that mouse-gray parliament of cells, that dream factory, that petite tyrant inside a ball of bone, that huddle of neurons calling all the plays, that little everywhere, that fickle pleasuredom, that wrinkled wardrobe of cells stuffed into the skull like too many clothes into a gym bag." I just I don't know. I just love that description of the brain. Yeah. But I feel like it's humbling to some extent.
I completely agree, because I feel like we take the brain very seriously,
right?
Especially in Western culture, as we have really put so much focus on the mind and thinking, after the Enlightenment.
Right.
And so to just kind of bring it back down to earth, bring it back down to it's just a part of the body, you know?
It's a bunch of wet spaghetti noodles that are, controlling your experience of reality.
Yeah.
So let's just dive right into it. We're going to talk a little bit about some neurotransmitters and some hormones that play a direct role in how emotions show up and process in the brain and how it makes you feel in your body and in your consciousness. We'll share some personal stories along the way, as per usual on this podcast. And we'd love to hear your personal stories as well. We'd love to know what your answers to some of the questions we ask each other are. You can let us know in the comments of the YouTube video if you're watching, or you can shoot us an email if you're listening on a podcast app. So question 1, I'm going to direct this one to Mason. How do you feel like your emotions show up in your brain and body most often? If you could describe it for us, like, how long does it take to process your emotions? Where do you feel your emotions most living in your body? That sort of thing. Either positive or negative.
Yeah, so I would say I get tipped off by my body before I realize what I'm feeling in my brain. So the majority of my emotions come from my chest, and it's normally either feeling hot or feeling cold, depending on the intensity. If it's happiness or anger, it's a little bit more, it's a little hotter.
Right.
If it's sadness or anxiety, then it's a little bit more cold or numb.
Yeah.
And so when I check in with my body, normally I can tell, oh man, the last 5 or 10 minutes, I've been getting kind of heated. I didn't even realize. I can take that step back just from feeling it in the body.
Right.
And then once I do that, then I'm like, these thoughts make a little bit more sense now.
Yeah, that's interesting. But sometimes I feel like we don't think about our bodies as neural, like part of the neural network.
Yeah.
Right. We think that our brain and our body are separate, but in reality, there are nerves throughout your body that communicate information directly to the brain. They are direct, immediate connected.
Right. Well, and I think one of my favorite examples is whenever you're having an argument, if you are just fighting, there's a lot of finger pointing, there's a lot of fists.
Yeah.
If you try to argue with your hands open, it is so much harder. It's so much harder. It is.
That's so interesting.
It is such an interesting little tidbit, but it's so true, because you're inviting somebody in with your hands open,
right?
And so it's hard to be like, you're horrible. Well, your hands are flat.
Unless you're slapping, of course, maybe. But that reminds me of a little video I saw on Instagram recently of a couple. They were clearly having a disagreement of some kind, but they had agreed with each other that anytime they were going to have a disagreement, if it was getting heated, they would put birthday party hats on. And it was just to disarm and deflate some of just the anger in it. And I was like, that feels really silly, but there's some brilliance to that as far as overriding some of your brain chemistry in a positive way to avoid hurting each other's feelings.
Completely agree. And I think that it just takes some of the seriousness out.
Right.
Which, when we get trapped in our own brains, I think things get so much more serious so quickly. It feels like this is the end of the world, and because our brains are a big part of our world.
Right.
So it makes sense. But then when we can just take a step back and be like, oh, this is going to pass, you know?
So I'm going to weave some factoids in here.
Yeah, please.
Sort of like in between each anecdote from us, I want to provide some education too. And you'll find some of these tidbits on our social media in sort of isolated videos with myself and other team members from the Willow Center. But one of the reasons why we feel our emotions in our bodies first sometimes before we bring our consciousness back online in our brain is because of two particular neurotransmitters. One is called glutamate and one is called GABA, G-A-B-A. And so glutamate is an excitatory neurotransmitter. It makes the information travel faster, whether that's information you're receiving in your body or that your brain is sending to your body or vice versa. It makes it travel quickly, excites it. Whereas GABA is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. So it like brings things back to baseline and it prevents it from overwhelming you. So they work in concert with each other, right? And when we are feeling any of these emotions, whether it's like the hot ones like happiness or anger, or whether it's like the cold ones like sadness or numbness or whatever, usually there's a glutamate GABA sort of like dance going on in our brains. Another little factoid, this comes from Luke, one of our therapists, shared this with me. He said that information in the brain travels at the speed of around 260 miles per hour.
Okay. So
which is like pretty freaking fast.
Yeah. That's like one of the super trains in China. They just built. Like, we have one of those in our brain.
In our brains. Yeah. That's pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
So.
And so I was actually just listening to a podcast about some brain science-y stuff. And it was by the author of a book called Super Communicators. And they were doing some research, which was really cool, and it fits really well into this.
Okay.
So they said, when you're having a conversation with somebody, if you are having the same conversation, the same parts of your brain are going to light up when you're looking at an MRI.
Oh, between the two people.
Between the two people.
Interesting.
So, for instance, if you are having a logical thinking conversation, both of your frontal lobes are lighting up like a Christmas tree. But if somebody's having an emotional conversation and then you are trying to have a more just thoughtful conversation, right? It's more about just your intellectual ideas.
And someone else is trying to communicate their feelings to you.
Yes.
My wife and I have conversations like that sometimes.
And honestly, I fall on the feeling side of that more often than I care to admit. But no, like you'll see it. You'll see the amygdala light up in one person and then the frontal lobe light up in the other one.
And they're not aligned.
They're not aligned.
Interesting.
And so just similar, I mean, you're obviously, you're processing the information differently in the brain, and I'm sure that those neurotransmitters are different.
Right.
So with all that being said, how do you feel your emotions in your body or mind?
Similarly, I think I feel them more frequently or sooner than in my brain. I feel it in my neck and shoulders. And I guess this is particularly associated with like the negative emotions for me, but like you can probably attest to this. Like you'll see me like take my hat off and like run my fingers through my hair and like try and like stretch my back and my neck throughout the day when I'm starting to feel a little stressed or a little overwhelmed or a little flooded or whatever. That's where I feel it first, and that's before I've taken the opportunity to actually try and process, you know, what are the thoughts attached to those feelings? What are the things that are going on out here that are creating these feelings in me? And I don't know. I'm not sure whether my glutamate and GABA are out of balance in those moments, but I definitely feel it, up here in the shoulders first, and then I start processing it. However, apparently, this is another factoid that came from Luke, our colleague. Emotions actually only take about 90 seconds to quote-unquote process chemically in the brain. So a minute and a half. So like take, take anger, for example. It's an easy one, right? Like let's say you stub your toe and you're ready to just rip the door frame off the the wall that you stubbed it against. Like if you just like wait 90 seconds, you'll feel calmer already, because like the chemical process that's creating that feeling of anger in your brain is usually finished after that minute and a half mark.
Yeah.
Even if you still feel certain ways after that, normally it's a conscious decision to stay in those feelings than it is a chemical one after that point.
Oh man. Well, I that is so interesting because I think of times when it's the morning and I'm running late and I stub my toe and then I am just livid the whole rest of the car, right?
Yeah.
And then I think of other times where it's Saturday afternoon and I just made lunch and then I'm just like walking to my seat and I stub my toe. It really is like, I think it's like 90 seconds. Like I can really put that time frame on my anger, disappointment, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And that just makes so much sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that's another little humbling aspect of what we feel is really, really big is actually pretty quick, and then there's a lot of consciousness after that many of us are processing with our therapists to this day.
For sure.
So let's explore another neurotransmitter. So some of the most activating neurotransmitters are epinephrine, also known as adrenaline, norepinephrine, and cortisol. These three are sort of the primary hormones responsible for feelings of stress, as well as the fight, flight, or freeze response when you are experiencing something stressful or potentially dangerous or traumatic. So when you are feeling particularly stressed, or maybe it's a near car accident type scenario, something like that, which of those three Fs, fight, flight, or freeze, do you most naturally respond with?
That's a good question. I'm going to be honest, okay? I thought, I as somebody who has grown up in this culture, I want to say that I fight. I want to say that I am going head first and I have all the courage in the world. That is not the truth.
Yeah.
I am flight.
Yeah.
Whether it be maybe it's because I used to be a runner, but
okay, yeah.
But no, what I really think it is I have a genetic predisposition to addiction.
Sure.
And I think a piece of addiction is wanting to get away from your feelings, wanting to get away from yeah. And so I really think that's where it comes back to for me. When I'm experiencing those feelings, I either want to get away from them or stop them as quickly as possible. And sometimes stopping them is pretty easy. It's just completing a task or having a conversation. And so in those times, it almost looks like I'm in fight, but really I'm just like, let's get this over with.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's kind of a confusing bit about the flight response in particular, is that you might have heard that it's just about physically escaping that scenario, when in reality it could also be an internal escape, like a dissociation.
Oh yeah.
Not like personality dissociation as much as just situational dissociation. Like I'm not handling this right now, and you just shut down and go into, whatever mode you need to go into to not experience those feelings.
You might actually have a great example of this. Okay. So having a young child at home, you've probably seen it happen in real time.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. The fight, flight, or freeze response is very quickly activated in 3-year-olds. Sometimes by things that are completely unreasonable. But, that part of the brain is still developing. And it's one of the oldest, most evolutionary, ancient parts of our brain.
Yeah.
We share it with the animal kingdom, right? The fight, flight, or freeze response. So, if the milk is not quite the right consistency, that could be a reason to flip that bowl of cereal over, or if the sock just doesn't feel right on my foot, I might freak out if I'm 3 years old.
Right.
Thankfully, we develop more of that prefrontal cortex to kind of counterbalance that chemistry as adults, but not always. Depends on the scenario, right?
For sure. Well, and I think too the flight responses, you can see it. Maybe not in 3, but I think especially in 7 to 12-year-olds especially, right as they get in trouble, you can just see either they are locked in and they're like, oh, man, I'm so sorry. Or you can just see it is a blank wall.
Shut down.
Just nothing there.
Yeah, it's true.
And that's flight. I mean, they're not running. They're still listening, quote unquote.
Right.
But really.
They ain't there, though.
They're not there.
They have retreated inside. Yeah.
But
I think I most naturally lean towards fight, and That might be confusing for some who know me, because I have a relatively gentle soul, and I don't show up in a room like a fighter would necessarily. But I think of the fight response more as defense, more as defensiveness, because that's really what our brain is trying to do. It's trying to defend us against danger, even if that danger is emotional only. Right? It's trying to keep us alive. It's a survival instinct. And I feel like when I am feeling stressed, like everything, like I mentioned before, starts to tense, which is typically the same like stance or response that a person gets into when they're going to like fight a bear or get in a boxing ring or whatever, and I feel that in me in particular, because even some of my cold, quote unquote, emotions like sadness or boredom or whatever, they sometimes feel like anger to me first. I think that's that fight, flight, or freeze response at the moment.
For sure. I think that's funny because for people who know us both, I think they would have flipped that.
Probably.
Oh, so can you tell me a little bit about what actually keeps all this stuff in check? Like, how do we make sure that we are not staying in fight, flight, or freeze? And what's at play there?
Yeah. So, fight, flight, or freeze response it is biochemical in nature, just like the other ones we've been talking about, right? And so there are a variety of hormones that can produce those negative reactions, right? Or even just help us process them in a healthier way. And we're going to kind of work through three of them. One is serotonin, one is oxytocin, and one is dopamine. They can all three get out of whack and get out of balance in the brain their own ways. But we'll start with serotonin first. So serotonin plays like a regulatory role in the brain. It's directly associated with sleep and like your sleep cycle. So, for example, if your serotonin is way too low, you're going to have crappy sleep cycles. And that can also feed itself into symptoms like depression and things like that.
For sure.
If you have too much serotonin, you can oversleep a lot and you feel really groggy all the time. It's also associated with mood, right? So it has sort of dual roles. What's interesting about serotonin, though, is that it's not triggered just in the brain like some of these other neurotransmitters are. This one's actually triggered in the gut, and it's produced in the gut. Okay, so if you ever like had a conversation with someone and they use that phrase like, "Oh, it's just my gut instinct," or "Oh, I just felt bad in the pit of my stomach about this person or this scenario," right? There's actually a really strong like neural network in the gut that is directly connected to the brain. So that's not just like a turn of phrase in the English language. Like that's actually sort of like instinctual language. Like when you have a gut feeling about something, like no, you actually do have a gut feeling about that.
Wow.
Yeah, it blows my mind. So
that is crazy.
Yeah. So in regards to serotonin, I think the most important thing to know about it is that it is one hormone that is particularly related to depression and severe depression. When serotonin gets out of balance in either direction, like oftentimes you need to change your lifestyle in a way and process your emotions in a way that helps bring serotonin back into a balanced, a balanced measure. And that's also, if you look at like some of the most popular depression medications, think like the Zolofts. I don't know what's another one.
Oh man. I'm on the spot. I don't. There's a bunch.
We are not pharmacists. Please don't hold this against us. But a lot of them are affecting serotonin release and uptake.
Yeah. Right.
A lot of them are trying to bring serotonin back into balance, and some people are just born with some imbalances in regards to serotonin. It's not your fault. You could be genetically predisposed to certain issues, even like Mason just illustrated a moment ago. But there is help, right?
Yeah.
So because of that, there are some solutions related to the gut. About serotonin.
And I want to hit on one thing before we move into solutions, just talking about depression as well as serotonin and all this stuff related to serotonin. So the first thing that I find really interesting is when people get onto their first antidepressant or their first SSRI, you actually find that the first 2 or 3 weeks are normally worse for people.
Right.
And you're like, wait, why is that? How is that possible? I'm on medication now. But here's the thing. now your brain and body are getting in sync again.
Right.
And so you have the energy level increase, but you've not really made it. You're still doing all the same stuff you were doing before.
Right.
And so you are still maybe oversleeping. You're not utilizing your time as well as you want to. And part of that was because you had no energy when you were depressed, right?
Right.
But now you have the energy, but it's like, what do I do with all this now?
Sure.
And so it's really tough. And so if you are just starting SSRIs, just keep that in mind.
Yeah, hang in there. And don't forget that therapy can still help, even if you started a medication program of some kind. Like, follow your doctor's orders, take it as prescribed, but consider talking to someone as well, because that can help with some of the processing part of that experience.
For sure. But there are ways outside of just medication.
Right.
And so, tell me more about those.
Sure. So because serotonin is produced in the gut, one of the best ways that you can affect your serotonin release and uptake and balance the levels is through good nutrition, right? So what you eat directly affects your mood. And everybody gasped in awe and surprise, right? This is something we've been told since we were like really young kids, right? Like what you eat matters to your health, right? But it matters as much to your mental health as it does to your physical health. Okay, so for example, think about the last time you were super bummed out. Like, which snacks do we typically reach for in those moments?
Well, definitely full of carbs. I mean, chocolate and pizza rolls for sure.
Chocolate and pizza rolls are your go-to?
Yeah, not together, but...
Yep. Yeah, mine are chili cheese dip.
Oh,
right, with some tortilla chips and normally soda. I normally do a lot of soda when I'm feeling bummed out.
As you wear your Coca-Cola hat.
Yeah, please sponsor our podcast, Coca-Cola. We're not trying to offend you. Anyways, so we reach for the unhealthy snacks, typically, right? Because it's like, I just need the comfort food. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with having a good junk food moment every once in a while, right?
For sure.
But if it becomes a habitual thing, let's say the feelings of depression or anxiety are chronic, you're experiencing it every day, and we're continuously reaching for these unhealthy snacks, that is actually like hurting our gut health. And that lack of nutritional value can actually make the depression worse because of the way it imbalances serotonin production. Whereas if we reach for fruits and vegetables, we reach for greener foods, like quite literally green foods, right? Foods that are colored green, right? Like leafy greens, broccolis, things like that. Like if we reach for something like that, maybe you can sneak some ranch dressing in there. If you're feeling naughty. You'll be able to help some of those symptoms you're feeling while still fulfilling that need to snack.
Yeah.
Right? So there's like really minor things. If you just like maybe 1 out of the 10 chips is a broccoli or something, I don't know. We can actually help ourselves.
Well, and so I've been trying to do this for a little bit now, and it's hard. It's definitely hard. And so what I started out with was getting the pre-packaged salads from like just the store. You can get them, and then you just open them up, and it's basically made for you, right?
Yeah.
But then that was starting to get expensive. So I actually just chopped up like a week's worth of salad,
put
it in a bowl, and now whenever I need, I'm like, okay, I want a snack or I need just something to bring with me. It is so simple to do it. And because I think that's the hardest part about eating healthy is it gets complicated so quickly.
Right.
Especially when I'm looking at all these Facebook videos and I'm like, well, they prepared broccoli really well. That looks tasty. The way I do it is not as tasty. I'm going to go to the chips again, you know?
Right.
But there's ways that we can make it just as easy as junk food. And then that makes it more likely to go for.
Yeah. Sometimes, the junk food is more about the convenience than it is about the actual, food choice, I think.
Let's be real, right? If you have like chicken or steak or shrimp in the fridge or in the freezer, right? And you can have that when you get home. That's going to taste better than McDonald's.
Heck
right?
Yeah.
It's going to taste better. But you also know it's going to take 30 to 40 minutes.
Right.
When McDonald's takes 2 to 3 if you get them without a lot.
Right.
It's
true, man.
Convenience it's tough.
It is. So let's move on to another one. So oxytocin is sort of like the next of the 3 that can help balance some of the stress hormones. Oxytocin is super important because it's most often released when you have positive face-to-face time like Mason and I are having right now, or with another person, typically a person that you love or that you trust or that you're comfortable with. It creates feelings of connection and intimacy. Okay, so oxytocin, some of the best brain science studies that have been done about oxytocin are between mothers and children that they've birthed. Oftentimes, anytime, like, if the mother's breastfeeding, like, that is a face-to-face, connective, intimate moment, and oxytocin goes into, like, hyperdrive and you know, creates those good feelings between mother and baby, and it happens in both of their brains, which is really beautiful, you know. But it also happens in just a couple of fellas having a podcast moment, you know. Like, it can happen when you have a high five from a friend, or a kiss, or an intimate moment with a loved one. Like, little bits of oxytocin are released in those moments. However, we have this thing in our pockets that interferes with oxytocin release and balance. And it's a thing that we utilize more or less to replace a lot of those face-to-face interactions. Again, for convenience. Maybe that's the real theme of this, is the convenience of bad brain science. But so, I'm talking about mobile devices, obviously. We have the internet in our pockets, and again, not to knock it, this is a tool that I utilize every day. I'm using it right now to film this video for YouTube, right? Like, this is an important tool. However, we use it in ways that do not help our brain chemistry. So tell me, in your own life, Mason, how do you interact with just the role that mobile devices and technology plays in your relationships within this sort of brain science context?
So I am an outlier. I'm not going to lie to you. I am actually a pretty strong advocate against using phones a whole lot.
Well, okay.
I
didn't know we were sitting with an expert, did you?
So I have deleted all social media off of my phone.
Okay. Is this like a temporary decision, or is this like we're done?
So I've not deleted the accounts, but I'm definitely not getting back on TikTok. That's for sure. I've taken YouTube even off my phone.
Yeah.
And I've removed, like, Facebook and Instagram. And so Facebook might be a little more temporary, just because it's a little easier for me to not get sucked down a Facebook rabbit hole.
Sure.
But I don't know. All of them are tough. And so the reason I did that, though, this was not just like one day out of the blue. I was like, I'm done with it all.
Right.
This has been like a 2 or 3 year progression where I've taken just one app at a time.
Yeah.
And my reasoning behind it was I would actively choose to just mindlessly scroll instead of connect with people. And so here was my first rule. I didn't follow it. It didn't work for me, but maybe it could work for you.
Yeah.
My first rule was, if I'm going to get on an app, I'm going to make a post.
Interesting.
Because at least then you are trying to have some form of interaction or connection. You're not just consuming.
Right.
Because the piece with oxytocin is it's reciprocal, right?
Right.
You're both in the moment together. You're not going to experience, like, oxytocin during the middle of an argument when you feel disconnected from somebody, right?
Right.
You feel it when you have that moment, that small, slight moment where you're just, like, watching a movie on a couch with a friend or a loved one, and, like, you're just like, man, we're in it,
Right.
Like, that's when you have it. And so I think if you use social media in a way that you are getting some kind of connection, that could be better.
Right.
But when it is focused on consumption, I think that's really when it starts to drain your oxytocin.
Yeah, for sure. And that's good. For me, I think there's a lot of areas I feel somewhat guilty in, right? I would say I'm more an expert on the opposite end, especially as a dad. It's really easy to notice when it's distracting me from time with my daughter, right? So, like, every day when I get home around 4:30, 4:45, like, the first thing I do after taking the work jacket off and the work hat off or whatever is playtime with my daughter.
Right.
And it's the first thing she asks is, Daddy, do you want to play with me? The answer, I pray until the day I die, will always be yes to that.
Right.
But I still have that stinking phone in my pocket. And, if it buzzes or if I feel like I have to check something because I forgot something at work or an email that I never responded to or whatever, like, the urge, it's an addictive urge, right? And we'll tell you why in a minute when we talk about dopamine, but, like, it's distracting from my face-to-face playtime with her. So, like, I have to physically remove the device from my presence in order to stop thinking about it and just be with her.
Right.
Right. So I got to put it in my room, in a different room or whatever while I'm with her in the family room, or put it on a shelf somewhere where I'm not going to feel it in my pocket. Right. And that's the only way that I can focus. Another place I notice it is like when I'm have that desire to like catch up with a friend that I haven't talked to in a long time. Normally we'll always text each other first, but it's like I make sure that it doesn't stay there. I try to be intentional. Like, okay, what day can you FaceTime? Right? Because even though that's not like physical face-to-face, it's still face-to-face enough that it triggers some oxytocin release. And
for sure,
frankly, it's a better conversation than just like, how's work going? Blah-de-blah, 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 over. 5 minutes, text, done.
Yeah.
That's just not meaningful,
No, it's not. And I do think like that all goes to show that there are uses for it, which let me put it this way, actually. Here's how I want to say it. You can use it to till up the ground of connection, but to plant the seeds, you have to make a phone call. You have to go have an interaction in person.
Right.
Like, it has to escape the realm of social media or just texting in order for the oxytocin to be fulfilled.
Right.
But that doesn't mean it can't be a great tool to start that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, use with thoughtfulness, I guess, is the main takeaway there.
Yeah.
All right, so the third of 3 hormones that can really help balance out some of the stress neurotransmitters is dopamine. Now, dopamine is probably the one neurotransmitter that we talk about the most at the Willow Center in particular because of the role dopamine plays in the addiction cycle, which, if you didn't catch it on social media, one of our therapists, Alex, helped produce a great little overview of what dopamine does in the brain in that context just a few days ago. So check our Facebook or Instagram for that, speaking of social media. But dopamine is like the feel-good hormone or the feel-good neurotransmitter. It is triggered when you have a good meal, right, and you're digesting that, and it tastes good, right? It is triggered also when you eat junk food and you're enjoying it. It is triggered when you're enjoying a nice movie or stand-up comedy special. It's also triggered on the 6th hour of video game playing.
Yeah.
Right, it is triggered when you quench your thirst with water. It's also triggered when you have a beer.
Can I say, I'm sorry to cut you
off. Go ahead.
I've heard the best example of dopamine. I love it so much.
Let's hear it.
And so, dopamine is released when something is new or better than expected. That is, and I love that description. And so they give this example of a gumball machine.
Yeah.
So if you go up to a gumball machine, you put a quarter in, you get one gumball, you're going to be happy. You might get a slight bump in dopamine, but not very much.
Right.
But when the dopamine really hits, it's when you put in a quarter and you get 2 gumballs. That is when you're like, this is even no matter your age, getting 2 gumballs for 1 quarter, it's better. It's an exciting experience.
Yeah.
It is better, right? And I think you can see it most evidently in children, though. Like there's so many new experiences. There's floods of dopamine and those new experiences. And so you do get some dopamine from, good food and all the stuff that Chase just mentioned. Don't get me wrong. But I think and you're probably
there's
getting
a threshold, right?
Yes,
like there's an amount of that where your brain just starts to get used to it,
right? Where it goes from a handful of chips is pretty tasty, but when I eat half the bag, I feel even better.
Half the bag, we're going all the way, whole bag. Yeah, it's true. So dopamine in each of these examples, it has both positive and negative outcomes, right? So although it feels good in the moment and it sort of motivates you to go and pursue that feeling again, depending on what you're using to trigger that dopamine release, that can be either great, fine, good, or really terrible. In particular, because of what you're mentioning with the pursuit of something newer, better. Our brains are naturally excitatory, right?
Yeah.
So when you add like a substance to the mix, what happens to dopamine in the brain then?
So it is crazy what substances do to dopamine. Substances basically open a floodgate in a small river, right? It is just like it's like when you're driving through an old country road and then you see a creek that you've seen a million times, but it is just like 12 times bigger.
Yeah.
That is what substances do.
So it's a massive amount of dopamine, and it's a manufactured release as opposed to a natural release. That's a major sticking point, because some of these other instances, like eating good food that we've mentioned before, or having a nice time with some form of entertainment or a good experience with a friend, like those are more natural dopamine releases, as well as like with exercise, we get dopamine release too. But when you are drinking or using a drug of any kind, that is manufactured. That's like starting up the dopamine factory, going overtime and putting all those neurons to work when they're not prepared for it. And then it's just like, okay, fine. Like all the dopamine goes.
Right.
Mass production, right? Big sale on dopamine when you add that. So that's why you feel that sensation. And anybody who's listening or watching who's experienced substance use firsthand, you feel those sensations of a buzz or a euphoric high, or in some cases, if it's a depressant, more of a euphoric low, or even just going to sleep.
Yeah.
Right? That's why you feel that. It's a massive amount of dopamine. However, the threshold rule still applies. Right? You'll need more of that substance the next time to achieve the same result. Right? Your brain will get used to that little by little, which creates dependence. Once you have dependence on that substance, your brain starts to sort of insert that substance importance in your survival mechanisms and cycles than just your pleasure cycles, where you start to believe and your brain starts to make some decisions on your behalf that this substance is what's keeping you alive. It's what's helping you not feel sick because of the withdrawal symptoms. It's what's giving you whatever you need to get through the day, as opposed to just something that felt good that one time.
And the crazy thing with dopamine is how tied in it is to motivation.
Right.
And so when you look at it from a substance use perspective, okay, you stop substance use, you feel unmotivated, you feel groggy, you're just, that's especially for people dealing with addiction, that's the feeling that you get to start, as well as sickness and all this other stuff.
Right.
But I want to bring it closer to home for people who are like, oh, I've never experienced addiction before. Well, have you ever scrolled on your phone for 3 hours and then you get off of your phone and you feel like garbage? You feel bad.
Right.
But you're also not motivated to do anything.
Yep.
It's because all your dopamine just got completely wiped out.
Right.
You just, you got a strike. You bowled a strike on your dopamine. All pins are down,
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. That's just a good point in general. If you think you've never experienced addiction, yes, you have. Yes, you have. If you're listening on a mobile device right now, like go to the Screen Time app and see what it tells you about the previous week's usage time, and you'll know that you've experienced addiction. It might not be as chemically dependent, but my goodness gracious, it's behavioral at least. But that's the topic for another day. So let's end on a high note then. No pun intended. What are some healthy ways that we can bring dopamine back into balance? That we can trigger normal, healthy, natural releases of dopamine, aside from some of the ones we've already mentioned. Like, what are some activities that our listeners or viewers can go home and participate in or build into their weekly routine that will help balance out dopamine in a positive way?
So what I always love to say when I'm working with people who are just experienced a reoccurrence or new substance use, is I always love to say you have to start setting out time for self-care. And what self-care used to mean for so many people was I'm going to eat healthy and I'm going to exercise. Those two things,
that's a great start. Yeah,
they're amazing. But what I had somebody, and they never really exercised, and they were like, I'm going to start exercising to get dopamine. And it's like, well, that's a really hard place to start.
Yeah.
What if we can start off with a walk?
Right.
Like, that is so different. And so what self-care looks like for you might be different. And here's some suggestions, if I may.
Okay.
I think meditation is a great place. You can do it within 5 minutes. There are so many free guided meditations on YouTube, and they are just going to walk you through it, and you're going to feel better and lighter at the end.
Right.
Another really good one, especially for people who are sitting at a desk all day or people in manual labor, is just like 5 to 10 minutes of stretching. One, it's going to help you get off the couch, and that's going to make you feel better.
Right.
But two, your body will feel looser, and you're going to feel accomplished by the end of it.
And remember, your body is a neural network too, right? Like we mentioned at the beginning.
And both of those things are not physically intensive, but what they do require is us to take some time to care about ourselves.
Yeah.
And then we get to walk away with that being like, dang, I care about myself. And that's like a cool feeling to have, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
But do you have any, Chase?
Yeah, I've got a couple. So I'm a musician. It's one of my handful of hobbies that I dabble in, and one of the biggest dopamine releases is being able to play music. So if I'm really feeling down, like I'll pull out a guitar or pull out my trumpet or whatever and commit to just like putting on a recording and trying to play along for 5 minutes. Something really simple like that, where it's not a huge time commitment, but it's something that just gets a different part of my brain active. That's going to help trigger a more natural dopamine release, calm some of those stress hormones, that sort of thing. Another one, and this is more for the parents out there, especially if you have a young kid, dancing with a toddler. It's hard not to feel happy when you're doing that. And we've got sort of a playlist of like songs that my daughter just loves. Some of them are straight from the Bluey soundtrack. Some of them are 90s hip-hop bangers, you know? So it just kind of depends on the mood of the day for her. Right. But we'll put that playlist on and just dance around in the living room, and it gets your body moving. I have to focus on her and her giggling and laughter and being silly with her, and it's like that's a good natural release of both of dopamine and of oxytocin for me. So I try and pursue those moments whenever they arrive, you know, because I know it's going to help.
And might I say, too, if you are trying these things, you're like, okay, I've tried meditation, I've tried stretching, I've played with my dog or my cat, I've danced with my kid, and I just, man, like none of this is really making me feel how I would like to. That's an awesome opportunity to maybe start therapy.
Absolutely. Or reach out. We're here for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know the phone number, 317-852-3690. We're right here in the heart of Brownsburg. If you need support, please know that we're here for you. Because it's a lot, right?
Yeah.
Being responsible for your own brain, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of responsibility.
It is.
Sometimes you need others, you know, to be able to help you get those chemicals all balanced out. And, you know, more importantly, put in the life activities and hobbies and habits and practices that are going to keep things balanced once you get to that point of healing and processing.
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
I think that about wraps it up.
I feel like I have become a brain scientist. Give me my PhD, all right?
All right, Dr. Christie. Thank you guys so much for listening or watching if you're watching on YouTube. This has been episode 3 of season 4 of the Willow Center podcast. Next month, in the month of April, we're going to be talking about the topic of honesty, which is like a good one.
Yeah.
I mean, all of our topics are good ones, but we're going to be sort of exploring it within the context of 2 different lenses. Honesty with self and honesty with others, both of which play a pretty tremendous role in mental health and substance use. So we'll talk about that next month. Get prepared for it. In the meantime, if you have questions, if you have a topic you want to talk about or you want us to cover, let us know. Send us an email. Leave us a comment. We would love to be able to get more collaboration with those who are listening or viewing. Until then, take care of yourselves, be well, and we'll see you soon.